Welcome to the Navigating Life and Leadership podcast. On your journey of life, you will experience many ups and downs, and through it all, you will influence others along the way. Believe it or not, that makes you a leader. Guided by Scripture, our podcast aims to help equip you to navigate the twists and turns of your life while faithfully fulfilling this call of leadership.
Welcome to the Navigating Life and Leadership podcast, coming to you from First Baptist Church, O'Fallon, Missouri. I am your guest host, Becca Murray. Today we'll be talking about influencing, leading, what it is all about. You may notice our regular host, Julie Newman, is with us, but she is in a different chair and effectively a different role as guest. So tell us, Julie, about what your background is and experience with leadership.
Okay, thank you. It is very different on this side of the table, I have to say. So leadership is really very important to me, but it didn't start out that way. I graduated with business degree from Southwest Baptist University, and then I spent my whole career at Boeing in a finance position. But then I grew into leadership, and at the time I was working, as many people do, you have kind of a side business that you get involved with. And I got involved in one was very focused on leading, and through it, I developed a self-education about leadership. And it really became, I could see how important it is for everybody and how it can influence people's lives in all different ways. And so then I was blessed. God put me in a position in my job at Boeing where I actually had to develop a leadership training course. Boeing had a phenomenal leadership development center, but this CFO wanted me to develop something specifically for his organization. So it was really amazing how God brought that together, and it really went from interest to passion for me. And so then when I retired, I was really excited that Pastor Mike was wanting to have leadership development here in the church. So now I can do that here at FBCO.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I love to see how God puts it first as just like an interest.
Yeah.
And then develops it into something so much more.
Absolutely.
So the title of this podcast is Influencing, Leading. What is it all about? So what exactly does that mean?
That is really a good question. One of the things that in the first episode of the podcast, we really kind of explained the evolution of navigating life and leadership. And we also defined what leadership is. And so I really want to revisit that briefly for this because there are a zillion different definitions of leadership.
Sure.
Books, schools, classes, curriculums, everybody has different definitions. So we have here at FBCO and the Leadership Institute adopted a definition from the book Launching a Leadership Revolution, which was written by Orrin Woodward and Chris Brady. And I'm going to read that to you because sometimes I mess it up, but it's really leadership is the influence of others, kind of going back to that influencing aspect of things, but it's done in a productive, vision-driven direction, and it's done through the example, character, and conviction of the leader. So it really talks about, I love they added that aspect of how we do it, example, conviction, and character, because a lot of people may be influencing people, but they're influencing them in a bad way. So we're really willing to focus that it really needs to be good leadership is all about focusing people in that right direction.
Sure. So would you say that this is applicable to everyone in the audience or those that are just in leadership positions?
Yeah, that is something that I continue to try and educate people about because I believe, at least in my experience, people have a preconceived notion in their minds when they hear the word leadership. They oftentimes will respond one of two ways. They'll say, oh, well, I'm a leader, so I'm really excited. This is something I want to learn about. But I would say the vast majority of people I encounter say, oh, well, leadership, I'm not a leader, so that doesn't really affect me. So I typically try and challenge people's thinking on that, which is why I'm glad you asked that question. I like to break it into two different avenues. One is positional leadership, and the other one is influential leadership. When those preconceived notions are often dependent upon positional authority. Most people think of it from a job or in a committee or some level or position that they have leadership.
Sure.
Unfortunately, leaders, even though that's their title, they may not actually be good leaders. They may be more of a manager. People can respect the position, but not necessarily the person in the position. And that's something that we really try and make changes to. Management to me is really more that orchestrating of the tasks, whereas leadership is that, as we defined it, influencing the people that you're leading. And the interesting thing as well is that good leadership does require good management skills. You have to still be able to accomplish what it is you're trying to lead people to. But that doesn't always mean that managers have good leadership.
Gotcha.
Additionally, one of the things that I always like to talk about is that God calls everyone to leadership at some point in their life. And whether it be in family, in church, brothers and sisters, everybody is an influencer. Just because you don't recognize that, I always am trying to challenge people to think differently, such that they recognize, oh, I guess I am a leader. I mean, I've talked to people at church and Sunday school. It's like, hey, you're leading this life group. You're leading this ministry or something, and they still don't necessarily see it as such.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So I want to ask one more question before we move on. So the debated question, are you born a leader, or is this something that can be learned? What would you say?
Well, whenever I've been asked that question before, it is a highly debated question. I always emphatically say, yes, you can learn to be a leader. You are not a born leader. I recently have started rethinking that position to a degree. I still emphatically believe and keep my stance that anyone can learn it. But given the definition is that we're all called to be leaders, since we were born, we're always influencing someone. So I do believe you are born to be a leader just because God placed you here, and he knows that he's given you some level of influence anywhere. Additionally, he provides each of us with spiritual gifts. And so our goal is really to use them and help equip people, one, to recognize that they are a leader, as I've shared. This is applicable to me, and then provide and equip them to be the best leader that they can be.
Very good. All right. So a great leader, how do we become a great leader?
That is a huge question.
Okay.
As I said, there is a ton of classes, experiences. Everybody out there is trying to teach people to be good leaders. And I'm not going to sit here, and even in our own Leadership Institute, we had a curriculum over like months. We've done conferences that are multiple days. So there's no way that we can cover that full entirety of that question in this short podcast. So I do like to break it up into really, in any of the training that I've done, I usually break it up into two kind of thought processes. One is about learning to lead yourself. And the other is you have to understand yourself, as I said, before you can begin to lead other people. So I always start with helping people to learn more and about leading themselves. Now, in the Bible, we don't talk about self a lot. And this is not trying to say, hey, you need to be focused on self. It's opposite of that. We really want people, though, to, just like the Holy Spirit will convict us in our heart of sin or something that we're discernment as to what's right or wrong. I want people to be able to learn some characteristics and qualities of leadership that can help make them better at doing it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So we call that here at FBCO the interpersonal leadership, and then intrapersonal leadership.
Okay. So I I know that we don't have time to discuss all of that you're talking about, but can you elaborate a little bit more on that intrapersonal leadership?
Yeah, as I said, that's the way we want to start. So intrapersonal leadership is, I think it's important to start with a good foundation. In all of my classes, I typically use the example and illustration of if you're building a house. If you're building a house, one of the first things you want to do is have a firm foundation. So if you don't have a strong foundation, the house is going to fall down. In Matthew 7:24-27, the Bible talks about the parable of the house on the rocks. Heard of that before? So the Bible talks about how if we build our house upon the rock, when the rain and the storms and the sand and everything storms come, then it's going to stand.
Right.
Whereas if we build our house on the sand, when those some storms come,
the house on the sand went splat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we don't want to go splat as our leadership. So one of the first things in building that foundation that we talk about is understanding your why. What is my purpose? Another way of looking at it is, what's my purpose? Purpose in life. And so in the book that I mentioned where we get our definition, launching a leadership revolution, they talk about 3 levels of motivation. I think throughout the world we hear oftentimes about hierarchy of needs, those kind of things.
Okay.
The motivation is another way of looking at our why. So the lowest form is like material success. The next highest above that might be emotional respect. And then the most important, however, is purpose, destiny, and legacy.
Okay.
And that is where the spiritual can come into play, where God brings a part of that into our life, is really understanding, what did he put us here on earth to do? Immediately, I'm going to first say our primary purpose is to glorify God. But beyond that, some of the special, unique gifts and abilities that God gives us, he wants us to use those to the betterment of his kingdom. The next thing that I'm going to talk about in that foundation is really our attitude and our thinking. They kind of go hand in hand.
Sure.
Our attitude, the one amazing thing about attitude is that it is something that you can change immediately. It is a choice that you make. I often use the story of an old lady who was very affluent, and she lived her whole life in these, big houses. She really did a lot of amazing things in her life, and she was getting to the point where she really needed some assistance. So she was needing to move into like an assisted living kind of facility. So she didn't have any family. She went and called a driver to come pick her up and take her as she moved into this new facility. So he saw where she was coming from. He kind of knew where this place was that he was driving her to. And he was a little surprised at how positive she was about the whole thing, because here she's leaving this huge mansion and she's lived this amazing life. And here she's going to now move into this small assisted position. And so he asked her, I don't understand. How can you be so excited and joyful about it? And she goes, it really has absolutely nothing to do with my surroundings. It is my choice. Every morning I pray to God and I thank him for all that he's given me. And it really has nothing to do with the curtains or the size of the room. It's really all about my attitude. I think that's a really great example of how attitude can change things. Others examples of attitude that you can change automatically is, you ever get in a car stuck in traffic or something?
Right.
And so you can go, she's cutting me off, or something to that effect. Or you can flip the switch and say, maybe he has an emergency he needs to get to. So your whole demeanor changes when your attitude changes as well.
For sure.
In addition to that is thinking, the way we think. So the Bible talks a lot about thinking. And so there's a couple of verses I want to mention. Proverbs 23:7 says, "For as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he."
Mm-hmm.
Another one of my favorites is Philippians 4:8. I never get all of these right, so I'm going to read it. It says, "Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent and praiseworthy, think about such things." Mm-hmm. So God directs us to our thinking and how we should think.
Sure.
One of my favorite quotes, which isn't biblical, but I use it in my corporate training, and I think it's very fascinating. The concept is from Henry Ford. He said, "Whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right." Mm-hmm. And that goes back to kind of those preconceived notions. Challenging our thinking is really maybe thinking and changing our attitude, changing our thinking. So that's really one of the other aspects of the foundation we build upon.
Okay.
Finally, there's one more I like to kind of talk about, and that is character. Okay. That was in the definition of leadership, right, is the character of the leader. And character, a lot of times people don't really understand what character means. Again, we have a definition in our mind, but a lot of times people think of a really good example of this would be as a parent or friend, you might be seeing your children or you yourself may be seeing someone being bullied. Mm. And, I don't have any kids, but I've heard from other parents say, when the child has come home and say, "Hey, so-and-so bullied them." And then the parent asked, "Well, what did you do?" And they said, "Nothing." And they still got in trouble. Mm-hmm. Like, why am I getting in trouble? It's not because you didn't join in. That's not what character is. Right. Character is stepping up.
Sure.
And taking action and doing the right thing just because it's the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. And that takes courage. It's really hard sometimes to be a person of character, especially in the work world as well. I experienced this in my line of work, and I think you'll find that everywhere. There's always leaders that you don't necessarily respect that you ultimately are accountable to.
Right.
So it's really about having the courage sometimes if you should be asked to do something or see something that's not right, to have the courage to step up and do something about it. Mm-hmm. The Bible also has a couple of really good verses regarding that. And in Joshua 1:9, it says, "Be strong and courageous. Do not be lighthearted or dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." And then also in Philippians 4:13, it says, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." So when you're faced with some of those challenges in life, recognize you have the opportunity to lead through example and through character by doing and stepping in and taking action to do the right thing. Mm-hmm. So those are really kind of those foundational aspects that we talk about with intrapersonal leadership.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you would like to share just to kind of put a little bow on today's podcast?
There's actually a lot to still talk about. We haven't really covered them. I do have a couple of things that I wanted to kind of mention. I feel a little guilty not talking about the interpersonal relationship a bit. So some of the things that we will have further podcasts about a whole lot of different topics. Some of them that I was just talking about, that purpose and direction for life, that key first foundational aspect. Mm-hmm. We're going to be having a whole podcast series about navigating your purpose and direction for life.
Okay, now pause on that for just a minute. Mm-hmm. You will be host at that point, right?
I'm
okay, good.
That, yeah.
I'm just saying, just making sure I'm not signing up for anything here. No, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's good. So I will host that, and I will have Pastor Mike and Pastor Brandon Kiesling joining me on that. We did a whole series on that about 2 years ago here at the church. So we're going to be using a lot of the information from that from a John MacArthur book.
I look forward to that. That'll be great.
Thanks. And then interpersonal relationship, we also are going to be having lots of podcasts about those. So I'll just talk briefly about what maybe some of those topics are.
Sure.
I like to say, give you a little Scooby snack. Are you familiar with the Scooby reference?
Yes.
Okay, Scooby, like the Scooby-Dooby dog. Little Scooby snack as to what that's going to be. Hopefully people are going to want to come back and hear some of those as well. So some of those are going to be still about understanding how to influence people, but doing it through emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is huge in the corporate world. However, something I noticed was lacking was about God awareness. And so emotional intelligence is one of those things we can continue to grow and learn about. But bringing God into it is really important. And I found a resource called Relational Wisdom 360, authored by Ken Sandy. And we're going to be talking about that. We're also going to be talking about tactical things like communication, how to have effective communication, good elements of that. Ken Sandy also wrote a book called The Peacemaker, so how to deal with conflict. And then understanding personalities, because you're going to have lots of differences in personalities that you're like, why are they doing that? Why are they acting like that? Those can provide insights and general characteristics that people can become aware of to help manage how they deal with other people. So those are a couple of the things that I wanted to mention. And lastly, before we close, I want to go back to challenging people's thinking, asking yourself one question. Do I influence anybody? If that answer is yes, which I believe that answer is going to be yes for everybody, then that is really your answer as, are you a leader? And then challenging them to recognize that and then learn how to be the best leader they can.
That's great. Thank you for that challenge. I think that is a great way to end today's episode.
Thank you.
And I just want to thank you all for joining us for this episode of Navigating Life and Leadership podcast. Until our paths cross again, remember to keep God as your true north, and He will direct your path, because where God guides, He provides.
If you want to learn more, or you're looking for a new church home, we invite you to First Baptist Church O'Fallon. Information is available on our website at www.firstofallon.com, or you can contact us directly by emailing leadership@firstofallon.com. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you won't miss future episodes.